Right, well, here we are. Different podcast talk show type thing. David Nolen in the house.
Hi.
Thank you very much, David, for coming along. It's really an awesome honour to have you here today. You've given your talk at EuroClojure now. It's all over, so you can relax, have a few beers, or whatever. We just thought we'd have you on here just to talk about a few things to do with growing the community, that kind of thing. So sort of open question really about how do you think we can, you made a few comments in your talk about this, but what do you think are the big hitting factors that we can help to grow the community from the Java people, the Clojure people, the JavaScript people, that kind of wider community of people that are kind of curious about functional programming but maybe aren't quite there yet?
Yes. So that's a great question. I think, when it comes to programming languages, when you're sort of starting out, you have to convince people to use it when you have no users, right? You have no users. And often programming languages, they cater towards the sort of language geeks, like you have a cool feature, immutable data structures, functional programming, all these, that's what gets the people to try it out. You're offering something that other languages don't have. But I think in order to sustain the growth of a programming language, eventually you're going to have to be able to reach out to developers that maybe aren't really interested in the fanciest features. They really want to solve typical problems. They want to know how your technology helps them solve typical problems. And I think there's a huge hurdle. At a certain point in the life of a programming language, people want to know, show me something that you've done with this. Show me that you've done something with this. Show me products or applications. Show me that you've been successful with the technology. And now that we're this far along with Clojure, you go to these Clojure conferences, and it used to be I would talk to somebody like, do you use Clojure? And they're like, late at night when I'm hacking. And now, people are like, yeah, I use it at my job. I've been using it for 2 years, and we've built a great project with it, and we've got new projects in the pipeline. And at that point in a programming language, this life, you really want to take a moment and say, okay, we know it's succeeding. We know it's good. How do we grow our user base? How do we reach out to, this wider group of developers? Because again, you can't just focus on people that are looking for just going for cutting edge features. That's not enough for, I think, the bigger audience.
Yeah. Vijay?
So one thing I wanted to ask is that, so you're now spending a lot of time on building Clojure script, and so do you also do consulting along with writing Clojure script to different customer projects, or you're primarily full-time working on Clojure script?
At Cognitect mostly does consultancy work, but they're also a product company, and and the product that they have is Datomic. I'm actually on the Datomic team. I do I've occasionally spent some time to help out on the consulting side with consulting projects, but most of my time is spent working with the product team. I do, of course, spend a lot of time continuing to steward and guide the ClojureScript project. And that's, it used to be that I would do a lot of work there, not just, actually write tons and tons of code. But these days it's been great. I mean, there's more contributions now than there have ever been. And a lot of my time is helping other people succeed at contributing to ClojureScript. And I think that's also a huge factor in its future success, that people beyond, just me at Cognitect or a couple of the people at Cognitect understand how ClojureScript works fundamentally and are able to make significant contributions and push the project forward.
Yeah, I think talking about contributions as well, to get us back on track, because this is the kind of thing we should do. We were talking about contributions, and we saw this talk from Maria last year when she was talking about the Google Summer of Code, where she added the support for modules, I think it was, into the ClojureScript compiler. That seemed like a huge move forward in terms of interoperability between ClojureScript and JavaScript. We see that with other languages, that seems to be the big thing, which actually is bringing the JavaScript people in to the compiled to JavaScript ecosystems. So it seems to be a barrier for Elm for some reason, because they they want to have like ports and stuff like that. Do you think we can go any further than we have already in the closure? Not necessarily you, but other people in the community contributing. What kind of things do you think we could do there to make it a bit easier to consume libraries or to reach out to existing JavaScript libraries?
So that's a good question. There's actually a lot that we can do, and I've spoken about this a little bit, but we also have to be very realistic about the limitations of what's possible. I mean, one fundamental limitation is that ClojureScript uses the Google Clojure compiler. And when you sit down and you write a ClojureScript library, it absolutely is ready to be consumed by Google Clojure. Google Clojure can optimize it. It can dead code eliminate it. We produce the perfect code for it to consume. But people that write typical JavaScript libraries, they're not used to this idea of advanced compilation and getting sort of highly optimized code splitting. They've never had it, and they don't know the value of it, so they don't feel compelled to write code in a way that's easy to statically analyze. So at a certain point, there will be certain libraries that just won't work that great, right? There's nothing we can do about that. That said, it's surprising how many libraries that people write that are actually don't involve a lot of metaprogramming, that are written mostly a static style. It's really surprising. People tend to write pretty boring code, which is actually something that Google Clojure can understand. Maria's project is a huge step forward in saying, in the universe of JavaScript libraries that are out there, I bet 30% of them can pass through Google Clojure without a problem. And we would like to make that stuff far, far, far easier to consume. I hope it's clear that we take interop extremely seriously, and there's that initiative it's basically an alpha status, the JS module processing, and just recently we landed a patch in the current release that updates our support for that, and people have tested it out, and it works pretty well, and we want to hear more feedback, and we want to make it better. So yeah, we want the JS interop story to be really great. But people do also need to understand there is a limitation to what we can do based on the fact that we can't convince the entire JavaScript world to change the way that they write code.
Just one more point on that. I guess it's about benefits, isn't it, at the end for that kind of stuff? Because dead code elimination, people often think on the server side it doesn't really matter. Whether you ship 400 megabytes or 300 megabytes, it's 100 megabytes. It doesn't really matter. But when you're shipping JavaScript libraries, and you can bring it down to 2K or 10K rather than 2 meg, that's going to work a huge amount of difference, isn't it? And that's the kind of thing you can really sell if you're giving people that kind of win. It's not necessarily a performance win in the sense of raw numbers on a GPU, but it's a performance win from a usability perspective and a time to function kind of perspective. Do you think that's the kind of thing which could potentially, like, the JavaScript guys could leverage a little bit with ClojureScript, that they could bring that story out to bear a little bit?
So that's another great question. I mean, we do have to remember that while I think ClojureScript has somewhat of a different philosophy about what the best way to go about programming for clients is, the truth is that most JavaScript developers are experts with respect to page load time latency. So they are concerned about this problem, and people have done all these studies. If your web page takes longer than 1 second to load, chances are people don't actually wait. They go off. So performance is critical for engagement. So they are very aware of this. But I think what's happened is as the JavaScript community wants to build more ambitious applications. They want to bring in React, immutable date JS, Lodash, Moment.js, high charts, and then suddenly their JavaScript application is 2 megabytes, and even with their Webpack and their compression methods are like, our JavaScript is still a megabyte. It's a gzipped, it's a megabyte download, and it's because again. There isn't this wider discipline ecosystem to support things like dead code elimination and code splitting so that I can manage that. And I think that's why we've come out of necessity, right? It's because, like, if you look at the ClojureScript standard library, it's 10,000 lines of ClojureScript. ClojureScript would have been more or less a non-option.
Like dead in the water.
It would have been dead in the water if we did not have an answer to the fact that we have a very large standard library. So out of necessity, we decided to go with Google Clojure, and I hope that as the wider sort of JavaScript community understands it, that we could be, that could actually draw people who aren't necessarily, their interest is not in like JavaScript or ClojureScript. They're like, oh, I really want to solve the UI problem as best as I can. And actually, ClojureScript lets me leverage JavaScript libraries, and then that is a really nice language. And I think there's a kind of a large audience there of, I would say, UI programmers who don't necessarily aren't obsessed with JavaScript or not JavaScript, that just are looking for the best tools to solve the problem. And I think if we focus on that group, I think we can make a lot of inroads.
So you're leading the ClojureScript project, and Richiki is leading the Clojure project essentially. So is there any situation where when you guys are thinking together that, okay, there's going to be a new feature that we want to add into Clojure, oh, wait a minute, we need to think about whether this can be ported into ClojureScript. Are there any hurdles like that, or did you ever find yourself in that situation?
So that's a good question. I mean, Richiki wrote ClojureScript, so he's pretty familiar with the limitations. Although sometimes, he doesn't actively work on it, of course. So he'll implement something. But fortunately, I'm there at Cognitect. When Richiki comes up with an idea, I'm there. Other ClojureScript developers are there, and so we'll often chime in and say, we'll ask questions. What are the repercussions for something like ClojureScript?
For instance, was a very interesting example, wasn't it? Where what are you going to do in JavaScript with core async? It's already single thread.
Yeah, so core async is a great example. Though he already knew that he wanted that to work in ClojureScript, so he'd already planned that one pretty well.
Yeah. Maybe it's reducers then, or transducers.
So transducers again also very clean to port. Actually, ClojureSpec is actually a case that was pretty challenging,
right.
Because there's a bit of metaprogramming in ClojureSpec, and we can't faithfully port specifically some of the testing functionality, but we can provide something that's good enough. So there, some things that are functions in Clojure, they have to be macros, but of course. These come up in discussion. They have to pick a certain design, and I'll be, well, that's great. Is it okay that ClojureScript's going to be a little bit different from Clojure here, in that we'll have the same API, but we'll have to have documentation that's clear that these things aren't functions in ClojureScript. They're functions, macros in ClojureScript.
We're having some fun with the screen.
Sorry about that, by the way. Well, it's a blue screen, so we can change it to anything. That's much better.
We've taken up a lot of David's time, haven't we?
Yeah. So I just want to ask you a quick question about. So you're in a band, right? You go around the tour, and so can you give us some idea about what you play and that kind of stuff about your band?
Yes. So I don't actually have a band currently. So so I did have a band like about a year ago that was sort of active, and we did some stuff. But in the band, I played guitar and I did a little bit of singing, and I've been playing music for a very long time with some very good friends. Right now, I'm in between bands, so to speak, but I do have people that I collaborate with. We work on music together. So that's still happening. It's still active, but there's nothing for me to speak about yet. Right. It's still like in the I don't know, gestation. That's right.
Okay. Yeah, that's magic. Well, yeah, that's really good. Thank you very much, David. This is our first venture into this stuff. Fantastic to have such a great guest as yourself. Really honoured to do it. Thank you very much. And you get a free mug on the back of this, okay, which is really great. Yeah.